You've discovered MyStar Radio, a riveting podcast where secrets long forgotten are unearthed and brought to light. Be sure to subscribe, share and comment, engaging with the truths that lie within. And now, to your host, Kaz Quantumyst.
Subscribe now.
Welcome to MyStar Wisdom, ancient galactic insights for modern earthly souls. Today's episode is titled, Me, Myself, and I. I am Kaz, your Quantumyst. There is one person we have spent every second of our lives with, and chances are many of us have never truly met them. That person is ourselves, not the name we answer to, not the face we see in the mirror, not the roles we play. The deeper presence quietly lives beneath all of those things. From the day you took your very first breath until this very moment, there has not been a single second when that person was not with you. Through every joy and every sorrow, every triumph and every setback, every relationship, every dream, every quiet moment when no one else was in the room. They were there, always, and yet most of us know more about people we have never met than we know about ourselves. We know the basic facts about ourselves. We know our name, we know our age, we know where we were born, we know what we do for a living, we know the roles we play for everyone else. But do we really know the one who has quietly lived within all of those things? When was the last time you truly spent time with yourself? Not by yourself, with yourself. There is a difference. And let us be clear about something before we go any further. This conversation does not replace God, faith, or whatever name you give the higher source you pray to. For many of us, that relationship is the foundation of everything. Today, we are simply speaking about the human being who is trying to live that faith, carry that prayer, and walk that path. For those who walk a path of faith, getting to know yourself does not compete with serving the divine. It strengthens it. The more we understand who we are, the more powerfully we can serve what we hold sacred. Most of us spend our lives surrounded by activity. We wake up to alarms, we answer messages, we solve problems, we rush from one responsibility to the next, meeting deadlines, fulfilling obligations, building careers, caring for families, planning tomorrow while trying to finish everything that should have been done yesterday. We are constantly doing, constantly becoming, constantly moving. But somewhere in all of that, many of us forgot to stop long enough to meet the one person who has been walking beside us every step of the way, the one we call me, the one we call myself, the one we call I. Not your personality, not your reputation, not your achievements or your failures, not the identity you present to the world, you. Many of us have experienced a feeling of complete loneliness, even while standing in the middle of a crowded room surrounded by people who love us. The room may be full, the voices may be familiar, the love may be real, and still, somehow loneliness can find us. I know that feeling. In the past, I have thrown parties with as many as 200 people at my home, large black tie events, music, laughter, everyone dressed beautifully, and still, at some point in the evening, felt something missing. Not because the people there were not enough, not because the moment was not perfect, but because there are certain forms of loneliness that no crowd can answer. That is the loneliness we are speaking about here, not simply the absence of people, the absence of connection with ourselves, because we can spend our entire lives surrounded by people while remaining strangers to ourselves. And when we stand in front of a mirror, what do we actually see? Most of us see a face, some see age, some see beauty, some see flaws. Some see someone who is tired, someone who has overcome more than anyone else knows. But almost none of us stop long enough to ask the deeper question: who is the one looking back? And perhaps even more mysterious, who is the one doing the looking? Those two may not be the same. For thousands of years, philosophers, mystics, and spiritual teachers across every tradition have pointed humanity toward one of life's most enduring questions. Who am I? Who are you? Today we want to ask something even more personal. Have we ever truly met ourselves? Because until we do, we may spend our entire lives introducing ourselves to the world while remaining strangers to the one person we can never leave. From the moment we arrived in this life until the moment we leave it, there is one presence that never stops traveling with us, whether we understand that spiritually, emotionally, or simply as a human truth. That presence is the self we are here to meet. The greatest relationship we will ever build is not the one we build with another human being. It is the one we build with ourselves. And this is why one of the oldest spiritual stories ever told begins not with a name, but with a realization. A man standing before something he could not explain. A fire burning without being consumed. A voice calling him forward. Ground so sacred he was asked to remove his sandals before coming any closer. And when he asked the question that anyone in that moment would ask, if the people want to know who sent me, what name shall I give them? The answer did not come back as a title, not a description, not a history. The answer came back as a state of being. I am that I am. I am that I am. These words have moved through civilizations for thousands of years. Philosophers, mystics, and spiritual teachers across every tradition have sat with them, questioned them, and returned to them again and again. Their deepest power is closer than we think. We speak some form of I am almost every day. I am tired. I am afraid. I am ready. I am broken. I am healing. I am enough. I am becoming. I am powerful. I am great. I am beautiful. Every time we speak those two words, we are touching something far deeper than ordinary language. Today, we explore what lives inside those words, and we explore the layered ancient architecture of the self that every human being carries. Yet many have never been formally introduced to me, myself, and I. Before we continue, I want to thank all of you listening across the world. As of today, June 24th, 2026, MyStar Wisdom has reached listeners across 33 countries and territories and more than 155 cities. Thank you, wonderful souls, for helping these conversations travel far and wide. Most of you already know this, but for anyone joining us for the first time, I always like to remind everyone, these conversations are not meant to convince anyone of anything. Our discussions are for those who already feel a deeper call to look a little further, curious enough to explore wider perspectives without losing their foundation in the process. The purpose is not to tell anyone what to believe. It is simply to explore, to question, to reflect, and perhaps expand the way we understand ourselves and the world around us. In our last conversation, we explored the practice of sacred stillness, the art of becoming quiet enough to hear what the noise had been drowning out. We sat with ourselves. We learned to be still. And in that stillness, we began to listen. What we discovered there was the beginning of something we could not yet name. Today, we give it a name. In today's episode, we meet the one who has been there all along. The words we speak without knowing what they reveal. As we begin, listen to a few phrases we say to ourselves all the time. We rarely stop to ask what they imply. I said to myself, I thought to myself, I had to remind myself, I needed time by myself. I took a walk by myself. I needed to find myself. I surprised myself. I love myself. And one of the most destructive sentences a human being can carry within themselves or speak into the world is, I hate myself. Now hear what every one of those phrases is quietly and unknowingly confessing. There is a self, and there is another presence, watching it, searching for it, loving it, rejecting it, correcting it, trying to understand it. Two presences sharing the same body, the same name, the same life. We have all had moments when one part of us was clearly witnessing what another part was doing. We have all felt the gap between who we intend to be and who shows up under pressure. This is not failure. This is the human being accurately describing itself through language that has always known more than the speaker realized. And this is not only something we hear in English. Across languages, cultures, and generations, human beings have always found ways to speak as though more than oneself lives within us. We speak of the soul, the spirit, the heart, the mind, the inner voice, the conscience, the higher self, the part that knows better, the part that still chooses otherwise. We may use different words, but the recognition is the same. Humanity has always sensed that the self is not a single, simple thing. One part of us speaks, one part listens, one part acts, one part watches, and somewhere beneath them all, a deeper presence holds the whole arrangement. Three presences we have been speaking about without ever naming them for as long as we have had words, me, myself, and I. What the ancient world found carved in letters at the entrance to the temple of Apollo at Delphi, the most revered oracle in the ancient Greek world, was a phrase that stopped every visitor before they could ask a single question. Know thyself. Not know the gods, not know the universe, know yourself. Before their question could be answered, a prior question was waiting. Who is asking? This is where we must acknowledge civilizations separated by oceans, centuries, languages, and geography repeatedly arrived at the same conclusion about the human self. Again and again, across different eras and cultures, humanity described itself as layered, multiple aspects of consciousness sharing one life. Across the ancient world, people rarely viewed the human being as a single, simple self. Ancient Egypt, for example, described us as carrying different aspects, a life force, a personality, and something even deeper. Many people, without ever having studied a single ancient text, have already felt this. We have all had that moment, arguing with ourselves, catching ourselves, saying out loud, "Come on, pull yourself together," as if there were two of us in the room. The Egyptians simply gave a name to something we have always quietly known. This is where we must acknowledge none of these civilizations were in contact with each other. Ancient Egypt, India, China, the Navajo, the Dogon of West Africa, one of the oldest and most remarkably precise spiritual traditions ever documented. The Jewish mystics of the Kabbalistic tradition, the great philosophers of ancient Greece, all of them separated by oceans and centuries, all of them finding the same map of the human interior. Every civilization that went deep enough into the human experience eventually found the same thing: layers, selves within selves, an architecture that extends far beyond what the mirror shows. That is not coincidence. That is convergent truth. I am the most powerful words we speak. Now we enter the center of this conversation, and I want us to move slowly here. We began with an ancient story, a man standing before something he could not explain, a fire that burned without consuming, a voice that called him by name. And when he asked for something to hold on to, something to bring back to the people waiting for him, he was not given a title, not a name, not a description. He was given a state of being. I am that I am. Existence, knowing itself exists. Awareness, aware of itself. Before role, before function, before title, simply I am. In Sanskrit, the oldest recorded language on earth, the first vibration of self-awareness is called aham, I. Before thought constructs anything around it, before identity builds a story. Pure awareness, present to itself. Now consider this. The I we reach for in ordinary conversation, the one we use dozens of times every day without a second thought, we borrowed it from the same source that spoke from that fire. From the same recognition, the Sanskrit sages described as the first vibration of consciousness. Every time we say I, we may be invoking a presence far older than the personality currently using the word. And here is where this becomes, personally, significant, because the words that follow I am do not remain neutral. What follows I am becomes a declaration. I'm tired. I'm afraid. I'm not enough. I'm broken. I'm unlucky. I'm stuck. Or I'm confused. Most of us have said every one of those things, not as poetic expression, but as sincere reporting of how life feels. And there is nothing wrong with acknowledging feelings, but ancient traditions across the world repeatedly point toward the same realization. The words following I am carry creative weight. The deepest layer of the self is not passive. It participates. And what we repeatedly declare ourselves to be, the deeper self, slowly begins organizing around. This is why learning to genuinely love ourselves has always been far more difficult than simply speaking the words, because hidden inside the sentence, I love myself, is a relationship. One self offering compassion, another self learning how to receive it. Begin choosing what follows your I am deliberately, not as performance or empty affirmation, but as a conscious act of self-definition, flowing from the deepest layer outward. Me, myself, and I, the Trinity of self. Now we come to the phrase itself. Words spoken casually across centuries of human conversation, heard so often that most people never pause to examine the structure hidden inside them. Me, myself, and I. Before we explore what each one means, I would like to share something from my own life. Sometimes a story can say in a few moments what philosophy takes pages to explain. Someone close to me once said something I never forgot. She looked at me and said, "You need to find yourself." I was about 19 years old, and I actually laughed. I asked her, "What in the world are you talking about?" "Find myself. I know who I am. I've always known who I am. From a very young age, I was confident, decisive, someone who believed there was nothing I could not do. The idea that I needed to find myself made no sense to me, and yet those words never fully left me. They would come back from time to time over the years. I would smile about the memory, and still there was always the pause, the wonder. What did she actually mean? It was not until much later in life that the meaning of her words became clear. We were both right. I was right. I did know who I was on the surface. I was confident. I loved myself. I believed in myself. I had not lost sight of that. And she was right too, because what she saw with her intuitive and spiritual nature was something I had not yet connected to. She was not talking about the surface me. She was not talking about confidence, ambition, or belief in myself. She was pointing to something deeper, the spiritual self, the soul, the part of us that life slowly invites us to recognize. That is what find yourself really means. Not that we are lost, not that we have gone anywhere. It means we have not yet fully recognized what is most important to the self we already are. We get busy, we get focused on our finances, on building careers, on the homes we own or plan to buy, the cars we drive or intend to drive, and the lifestyle we are working to create. We invest ourselves in relationships, in finding love, in building families, in earning respect, and in the image we project to a world we spend enormous energy trying to impress. And none of that is wrong. Life asks something of all of us. They are surface things, though, and most of us, if we are still enough to admit it, spend the majority of our lives on the surface. Not because we are shallow, because the surface is loud, and the deeper layer is quiet, and quiet things are easy to postpone until something happens that will not let us postpone anymore. A loss, a health scare, an accident, a moment where everything we built on the surface became suddenly completely irrelevant, and something deeper woke up inside us and said, wait, what are we actually doing here? Those moments are not tragedies. They are invitations. What they reveal, what every genuine awakening reveals, is that we were never here to accumulate. We were here to expand, not to change who we are, to evolve into more of who we already are at the deepest level. And the clock, this thing called time that no one escapes and most of us ignore until we cannot, the clock has always been the reminder, not the enemy, the reminder. Life is short, and the ones who truly understand that do not become reckless. They become intentional. They stop spending their most precious resource, time, on things the soul cannot carry forward. We do not need to find ourselves. We are already here. Now, when someone arrives at the place where they say, I need to find myself, that is one of the most significant things a human being can recognize. It takes a rare level of awareness to stop in the middle of a busy life and say, something is missing. I am not fully connected to who I am. I need to look inward. That is not confusion. That is clarity, and it deserves to be honored. Most people never arrive at that recognition at all. They move through entire lifetimes without once pausing to ask whether the life they are living belongs to the self they truly are. So the one who stops, the one who feels the call to return, has already taken a step many people never take. The self is not lost somewhere outside us. It does not need to be chased across the world, discovered through another person, or proven through achievement. The task is far lighter than we were taught. Not to find ourselves as though we disappeared, to return to ourselves, because we forgot how close we have always been. What is missing is not the self. It is the awareness of what is truly important to the soul we already carry. We spend our lives reaching for others, yet the longest distance we may ever travel is the space between ourselves and our own soul. A room may be full of voices, laughter, and familiar faces, yet a quiet emptiness remains when we are strangers to ourselves. For loneliness is not always the absence of company. Sometimes it is the absence of connection with the one person who has been with us from the very beginning. You. We have all felt it, standing in the middle of everything and still feeling that something essential was missing, not outside us, within us, a part of us that had not yet been properly met. The greatest reunion is not with a long-lost friend, it is with the self we have neglected, forgotten, or left behind. What profit is there in winning the company of the world if one has lost acquaintance with one's own heart? For though many may walk beside us, the soul remains a lonely traveler until it is met, known, and welcomed home. For those who recognize. So where do we begin? My suggestion is simple. Stand in front of a mirror, look into your own eyes, and begin the way every meaningful relationship begins. Start with hello. I, the sovereign self. The I is not your personality. It is not your history. It is not your name, your nationality, or the accumulated story of your life. It is the witnessing awareness beneath all of those things, the presence capable of observing experience without being destroyed by every event it observes. Some traditions call this the higher self. Others name it the divine spark or the witnessing consciousness. Some may call this the galactic self, not as a replacement for the higher self, but as a way of describing the soul's wider cosmic orientation beyond a single human story. It is the part of us that sometimes recognizes a truth long before the reasoning mind can explain why. This is the proper order. The soul leads, the mind serves, the body carries the experience, and when that order is remembered, even briefly, even imperfectly, life begins to feel less divided within us. Myself, the witnessing self. Myself is the witnessing self, the one that steps outside the motion long enough to name it. When we say, I caught myself doing that, consider what those words require. There is a self in motion, and there is a witnessing presence that noticed it. Those cannot be the same thing. An eye cannot see itself seeing. I remember a moment I was in the middle of reacting to something, a frustration, a situation I told myself I had moved past, and I caught it mid-sentence. Something stepped outside the reaction and said, wait, that is not who you are choosing to be right now. That quiet observer, that was myself, not the one reacting, the one watching the reaction. And in that moment of watching, the reaction lost some of its power. That quality of quiet witnessing is myself. And the moment we can observe a pattern in ourselves clearly, without flinching, without immediately defending against what we see, the witnessing self has already begun stepping outside it. Me, the negotiated self. And then there is me, the self the world has always known, the one that learned very early, before it had language for the lesson, what was safe to show and what was safer to keep hidden, what earned love and what invited rejection. Me is not false. Every layer of the human self is real, but me is managed, adapted, negotiated over time between who we are and who the surrounding world required us to be in order to belong to it. Across every tradition that mapped these layers, me was never designed to be primary. Me was meant to be the interface, the bridge between the eternal interior and the temporary exterior. But for much of humanity, across most of recorded history, me has mistaken itself for the entire house. While the deeper selves wait in rooms the social world never thinks to ask about. The grief of forgetting. This is where I want to step away from the architecture for a moment and speak to the quiet grief living underneath all of it, because what we are exploring is not merely intellectual. For many of us listening right now, these ideas carry a quiet weight inside them. I want to tell you about a man I knew, a good man, an older gentleman, Italian descent, who spent his entire life building something remarkable. He was in real estate, worked for decades. By the time he passed in his late 70s, he was worth millions. And in all those years, he took only one flight. An opportunity came my way to join in on an investment property in Florida. It was open to a few other investors as well. I mentioned it to my friend since he had spent his life in real estate and he was interested in joining in. Since it was a much shorter flight than going to Italy, I suggested he take the trip. A chance to test the waters, to get out of California and see how he did leaving his comfort zone. I believed he was not only fearful of leaving that comfort zone, but of flying itself, since he had never done it before. That trip became the only time in his entire life he ever boarded an airplane or left the state of California. He had never traveled outside the country, never seen Italy, the land of his heritage, the place he always dreamed of visiting. He had spent his life selling properties across California, homes, commercial buildings, strip malls, and in his later years, some remotely beyond state lines. And yet, he himself only ventured beyond the borders of the state he called home that one time. Whenever we spoke, I would give him a hard time about not traveling. I would ask him, "When are you going to visit Italy?" knowing it was his lifelong dream. And he would only smile and say one day, "Soon. There is still time." Sadly, that day never came. He had already achieved everything he set out to build. He accomplished all of his childhood material dreams and goals. He just never stopped long enough to realize it. Fear had settled in by then, fear of leaving the familiar, fear of losing what he had worked so hard to create. And so Italy remained a dream, and the clock kept moving. In the final months of his life, someone arrived, a distant relative, practically a stranger who appeared to come in as help, as care, as family. But by then, illness had taken enough from him that he could no longer clearly protect the life plan he had spent decades building. And quietly, everything changed. As someone who planned carefully, he had documented his intentions in a will, the gifts he had planned, the charities and family members he had spoken of helping, the brother he had always intended to leave in charge of what remained. That distant relative took it all. The fortune he spent a lifetime building, the final wishes he believed were secure, even the way he intended his life's work to continue after him, taken out of his hands when he was no longer strong enough to stop it. In the end, he had no power over any of it. And the truth is, none of us really do. We tell ourselves we are in control. We plan, we build, we secure. But illness, timing, a single vulnerable moment, or simply life itself running its course can take it all out of our hands, just as it did his. There comes a time when even the strongest among us has no more power left to hold on to anything in this world except the soul we carry within. This friend of mine spent his entire life preparing to live. He built the wealth. He reached the goals. He created the life he thought would finally give him the freedom to enjoy it. And before he ever truly stepped into that freedom, time ran out. Should we ask ourselves, are we living a similar story? I shared the story of my friend not to bring sadness into the room. I shared it because this man's story is not unusual. It is, in some form, the story of many of us. Not necessarily the fortune or what became of it, but the pattern, the postponement, the life we keep preparing for while the one we are actually living moves quietly past. We become skilled at the performance. We learn the social self thoroughly. We build the version of me that functions, that moves through the world without causing too much friction. And in doing that, in doing what was genuinely necessary for survival, we leave other selves behind. The part of us that felt everything deeply quieted, the creative self set aside, the part that knew things without formal credentials dismissed. And most of us made that trade without realizing it was a trade at all. So it is worth asking ourselves, have we already reached some of the goals we once believed would finally make us free? And if we have we paused long enough to notice, or are we still postponing the life our soul came here to live? Exhaustion is often the sound of too many selves trying to hold the same life together. That particular kind of tiredness, the kind that sleep does not fully repair, may be precisely what generates it. The social self performing, the wounded self protecting, the soul self waiting, all of them consuming energy inside the same body on the same ordinary afternoon. Many of us have never been told that this fragmentation is not a character flaw, it is a condition, a predictable result of living in a world that consistently rewards the surface self while rarely asking about the deeper ones. We are not failing because we are unfinished. We are evolving through the very experience of being human. There was a self before the world had finished with us, before the conditioning fully arrived, before we learned through experience rather than instruction what we were permitted to be. That original self did not disappear. It learned to wait quietly, patiently, beneath the accumulated noise of survival. One of the purposes of this conversation is to create a moment in which it knows it has been remembered. The mind, the ego, and what they were built for. We need to address two forces that are among the most misunderstood in all of spiritual conversation. And precision matters here. The mind and the ego, neither is our enemy. That needs to be said clearly. The mind is a powerful servant and a dangerous master. Our minds process, compare, analyze, anticipate, remember, and construct meaning from the physical world around us. The mind is one of the most remarkable instruments in the known universe. And it was never designed to carry the entire weight of who we are alone. From the mind, the ego begins to form. The ego is the identity structure built over time to protect us, defend us, help us survive, help us belong. The ego begins as protection, yet protection, repeated long enough, can slowly become identity. And identity, built almost entirely around survival, eventually resists anything that threatens the structure it spent years building. This is why the stillness we explored in Sacred Stillness matters so deeply, not to silence the mind completely and not to destroy the ego, but to restore proper relationship within ourselves. Many of us have spent years believing that the loudest voice inside was automatically the wisest one. Yet the loudest voice is often the most reactive one. The deeper self tends to speak more quietly, and many of us missed it because we were listening only for volume. Stillness is not the erasure of thought. It is the restoration of authority. The mind returns to its role as instrument. The witnessing self reclaims its position. The soul, which never left, simply becomes audible again. The ego, protector, not prisoner, the ego at its core is simply the identity structure the mind builds over time and then mistakes for the whole self. It formed before we had language for the process, learning what was safe to reveal and what required concealing. It built armor in the places we were wounded and walls in the places we were afraid. Without it, the vulnerable self would have had no structure of protection. The difficulty does not begin with the ego's existence. It begins when the protector forgets its role, when the servant becomes the master, when the ego stops protecting us and begins protecting itself, including from our own growth. We do not need to destroy it. We need to remind it, with patience and clarity, who is in charge. The anti-self, naming what has no name. There is a deeper resistance the ego alone does not explain. For this conversation, we can give that resistance a name, the anti-self. By that, I simply mean the part of us that resists our own growth, our own healing, and sometimes even our own happiness. There is a self that is not purely protecting. It is actively resisting. Not out of ignorance. This self has heard the soul's direction. It has felt the pull toward authenticity, toward alignment, toward the life the soul chose before this life began. And it turns away anyway. It selects the familiar over the true, the comfortable over the courageous. Over time, that protective structure learned to speak in our own voice, to use our own reasoning, to cite our own experiences as evidence for why we should remain small, remain guarded, and resist the very growth trying to call us forward. It is the voice that says, maybe tomorrow, while tomorrow quietly becomes decades. Paul of Tarsus described this conflict thousands of years ago with more psychological precision than most modern frameworks manage. The things I want to do, I do not do. And the things I hate, those are exactly what I do. Those who have joined us before know there are certain words we do not claim as our own, especially the words I hate. If you have not yet listened to our episode, I Hate a Self-Destructive Spell, listen to it when you get the opportunity. And yet Paul of Tarsus said something so precise about the inner conflict that it deserves to be heard exactly as he said it. What he describes is not a declaration of self. It is an honest mapping of the war within. That was an accurate mapping of the tension between selves that every human being carries. The first step toward genuine inner freedom is not fighting the anti-self. Fighting gives it the conflict it was built to engage. The first step is naming it, seeing it clearly, separating its voice from the soul's voice with enough precision that the difference becomes unmistakable. Watch yourself. Mind yourself. There are two phrases we have spoken our entire lives without stopping to hear what they structurally contain. Watch yourself. In ordinary usage, it is a warning. Be careful, but examine what the phrase requires in order to function at all. There is a self, and another presence is watching it. Two distinct presences occupying the same moment. Those cannot be identical. Who exactly is watching whom? That question, followed carefully, leads somewhere most of us have never deliberately gone. And then there is the older phrase, mind yourself. In the Irish tradition, the Caribbean tradition, across cultures that retained older forms of expression, this phrase meant take care of yourself. Attend to what matters. But in its deeper reading, to mind yourself is to take conscious custody of your own mind, to govern the mind rather than be governed by it. Are we minding our minds, or have our minds been minding us? Force creates resistance, relationship creates authority. The moment awareness enters a pattern clearly, without immediately defending against it or being swept into it, the pattern is no longer completely unconscious. And a pattern that is no longer unconscious has already begun to lose some of its invisible hold. The inherited self. Before we reach the deepest layer of this conversation, one more self deserves to be named, because it may be the most quietly influential of all. Much of what we call our personality, our instincts, our fears, our default reactions under pressure, was absorbed before we were old enough to examine it. Fear that lived in a parent became caution that lives in us. Shame that belonged to a generation before ours became the voice that questions our worth before we even attempt anything new. Many of us spend decades fighting what we believe are our own limitations, our own anxieties, our own resistances, never realizing we inherited them the way we inherited the shape of a face or the sound of a laugh, not chosen, received, before we had the capacity to choose. The question is not only which self is speaking, the question is which of the selves we carry did we actually choose, and which ones were installed before we knew we had a choice. This is not about blame. The inheritance was not malicious. What we are responsible for, what becomes ours to examine, is what we do with what we received now that we are old enough to see it clearly. And what do we see when we finally look clearly? We see that everything we received, everything that may have seemed like a hindrance, a challenge, or a burden, can become a gift when we recognize its purpose. It becomes the very thing that places us on the path of our own unique life. What we inherited is not a curse. It is a blessing waiting to be understood. Whether we once considered it a strength or a limitation, the power is in what we do with it, and whether we have the wisdom to recognize that everything we arrived with gave us something to begin from. We arrived already fully equipped. Acceptance of that truth is itself a form of freedom. What we inherited is not where we are meant to finish. It is where we begin. At a certain point, awareness changes responsibility. Once we can see the pattern clearly, we are no longer only carrying what was handed to us. We are choosing what continues through us. We can honor where we came from without being ruled by it. We can understand our parents, our families, our histories, and still decide that the next version of our life will not be built from the same unexamined inheritance. Free will. It is we who shape the course of our lives. What was given to us may explain where we started. It does not have to decide who we become. We are already whole from the beginning. When we seek only to change ourselves, we risk moving away from the essence of who we are. The work is not to become someone else. The work is to understand what we were given, rise above what no longer serves us, awaken what has been waiting within us, and grow more fully into who we already are. Not to change, to evolve. The higher self, ancient, before your first breath. There is a phrase we hear all the time in spiritual conversation, the higher self. People say it casually, confidently, as though everyone already knows what it means. But do we? What is the higher self? Where did that idea come from? And perhaps, most importantly, where does it live? Some call it the higher self. Others call it the spiritual self, the true self, the oversoul, the inner being, the soul self, the I am presence, higher consciousness, or simply spirit. Each name is reaching toward the same recognition that there is a part of us beyond the personality, beyond the body, beyond fear, beyond the version of ourselves the world has come to know. But here is what takes this beyond belief into something worth sitting with. A woman named Dolores Cannon spent nearly 50 years conducting deep hypnosis sessions with thousands of people across the world. She developed a method of guiding a person into such a deep state of stillness that the ordinary conscious mind stepped aside entirely. And what she found, session after session, was that something else came through, something intelligent, something loving, something that knew every detail of that person's life. She called it the subconscious, though she was very clear this was nothing like the subconscious psychology describes. This was the part of us connected to the source of all things. Others had called it the higher self, the oversoul, higher consciousness, universal mind. And it told her directly, the name does not matter. It simply is. The Law of One, a body of galactic wisdom channeled in the early 1980s, describes the higher self as a more expanded version of ourselves, one that exists beyond ordinary human density, reaching back to guide the version of us living through this present experience. So, where does the higher self actually live? Dolores Cannon herself wrote that everything is composed of energy, and that the shape and form of anything is determined by its frequency and vibration. She described countless dimensions surrounding us at all times, invisible to our physical senses, not because they are not real, but because their vibrations move beyond what our ordinary eyes can detect. The higher self does not live above us in a simple sense. It exists at a higher frequency, a higher plane, a higher dimension of consciousness, not separate from us, not outside of us, but operating at a level the everyday mind filled with noise, fear, and the weight of ordinary survival cannot always reach. This is why stillness matters. Meditation does not create the higher self. It creates the quiet where we can hear it. The human self becomes still enough to receive what the spiritual self has always been transmitting. The lower vibration quiets, the higher frequency becomes available, and what was always present becomes possible to recognize. Some call this intuition. Some call it guidance. Some call it alignment. Some call it awakening. Some call it coming home. Here at MyStar Wisdom, we may also call it the galactic self. Not because that is the only name, but because it reminds us that our story may be older, wider, and greater than this single earthly lifetime. Call it what speaks to you: higher self, soul, spirit, oversoul, inner being, the I, the galactic self. The name matters less than the recognition. There's a wiser part of us, a steadier part, a part not trapped inside every fear, every wound, every opinion, every role, every temporary storm. That part has not abandoned us. It has not grown tired of waiting. It has simply remained present at a frequency just above the noise until we become still enough to hear it. We are from the light. People ask each other constantly, "Where are you from?" And we answer with a city, a country, a family name, a heritage. All of that is real. All of it carries dignity, and none of it is the complete answer. Because if we trace the thread of every tradition we have explored today, if we follow the soul layers inward, past the social self, past the conditioned identity, past the mind, past the ego, past the inherited patterns, past even the witnessing consciousness, every one of them eventually arrives at the same place: light. We are from the light. And when this human journey is complete, when every experience chosen before birth has been lived and learned and integrated, we return to it. We are not human beings occasionally having spiritual moments. We are spiritual beings moving through a human experience. The soul came first, the body was chosen. This life was entered with intention that the waking mind is still in the process of remembering. Expanding our understanding does not require abandoning where we came from. A broader view does not erase what came before it. It completes it. We are not changing our views. We are expanding them. And the difference between those two things is the difference between confusion and growth. Remembering this is not meant to separate us from humanity, but to help us move through humanity with greater compassion for ourselves, for each other, for the parts of every person that are still waiting quietly to be remembered. The walk. When we walk somewhere alone, along a beach, through a quiet street in the early morning before the world begins its noise, and someone asks later where we went, we speak a phrase that deserves to be heard differently from this moment forward. I went by myself, as if the self is company, as if we have always known without being taught that going alone is never entirely solitary, that we carry someone with us everywhere we go. We are me, myself, and I simultaneously, not one at a time, not in sequence, but all three present in every moment. The social self navigating the world, the witnessing self observing the movement, and the eternal I holding the entire arrangement with a patience that has never wavered. The goal was never to erase any part of ourselves. The goal is alignment, the soul leading, the observer watching with clarity rather than judgment, the mind serving rather than ruling, the ego protecting rather than controlling, and the conditioned patterns that resist growth, seen with compassion for how they formed, gradually shown that the safety they were built to protect already exists within the soul itself. That is harmony, not the silence of suppression, the music of selves that have finally found their proper voice within the larger arrangement. And together, we continue remembering. There comes a quiet moment in this journey when something shifts. We stop searching, not because we have given up, because we have finally arrived. All I truly need is me. All you truly need is you. Not because we were meant to walk through life alone. We were never meant for isolation. As human beings, we are stronger together. We flourish through love, friendship, family, community, and shared experience. There is beauty in all of it. There is a difference between sharing life with another and depending on another to become whole. One is love freely given. The other is attachment born from fear. We entered this life with ourselves. And when this life is complete, we will leave with ourselves. Whatever waits beyond this journey, we cross that final threshold with the one companion who has never once left us. The most important relationship we will ever build is not the one we build with another person. It is the one we build with ourselves. Me, myself, and I. Every other relationship is strengthened or weakened by that one. When we finally come home to ourselves, something remarkable begins to happen. We stop reaching for people out of emptiness. We reach for them out of abundance. Their presence becomes a joy rather than the source of our peace, a blessing rather than a rescue, a choice rather than a dependency. There is a profound difference between saying, "I need you," and saying, "I choose you." One comes from fear. The other comes from freedom. May we become people who enjoy our own company, who can sit quietly with themselves, who can look in the mirror without turning away, who can greet themselves with kindness. That is not isolation. That is the foundation. We come already standing, already rooted, already whole. And from that place, everyone who walks beside us is not completing us. They are not completing our story. They are becoming part of a story that had already begun. Some meetings are so ancient, they feel less like an introduction and more like a remembrance. There comes a moment when the heart recognizes a familiar presence and cannot say whether it has found another or finally found itself. We have spent this entire conversation learning the architecture of who we are, the layers, the selves, the ancient presence beneath all of it. And what we have really been doing, without naming it this way until now, is preparing for a meeting, not with a stranger, with someone we have always known. We allowed distance to grow. We allowed fear to build walls. We allowed the noise of the world and the weight of what others might think to stand between us and the most sacred recognition available to any human being. The recognition of oneself. And still, after all of it, after every year of distance, every moment of forgetting, every season of silence, the door remains. It has never closed. The soul does not tire of waiting. It does not withdraw its recognition. It does not stop knowing what it has always known. It simply remains patient, certain, and present until we are finally ready to turn toward it. Remember, I asked you to start with hello. Now we are ready for the question beneath it. The hardest part is simply deciding the distance has lasted long enough. So have the conversation. And if hello feels too small for everything we have carried, ask a deeper question. Ask it to the self you carry within and see reflected in the mirror, to the one your heart recognized before your mind could explain. Ask, how have you been? Communication brings us home. The return. In our last episode, Sacred Stillness, we explored meditation not as escape, but as return, as the quiet place where we begin meeting ourselves again. Prayer, meditation, stillness, reflection, even conversation with ourselves were never meant to turn us into anything new. They were always invitations to return into proper relationship with what was already there, not the destruction of the mind, not the rejection of the body, the restoration of proper order, the soul remembering how to lead, the mind learning when to listen, the body no longer carrying responsibilities it was never designed to hold alone. This is how we begin getting a hold of ourselves again, not through force, through remembrance, through stillness, through learning to remain present long enough to hear ourselves clearly. So my friends, as you go forward, remember this: watch yourself, be with yourself, love yourself, and remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Man, know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and the gods. Inscription at the Temple of Apollo, Delphi. The questions that close this conversation. Which self has been speaking most in your life? Which self have you been starving? The name you call yourself when no one is listening? Is it a name you would choose for someone you love? And the one that chose to be here? The one that was ancient before your first breath? Have you introduced yourself to it yet? If what was shared today reached a part of you that recognized itself, share this episode with someone whose inner world deserves to be taken seriously. Subscribe so the next conversation reaches you when it arrives. By subscribing and sharing, you help us spread wisdom and insights that resonate with those who are ready to recall or open up to new concepts. Until next time, my spiritually related souls, keep looking inward, keep growing, keep remembering who you are, and keep becoming more fully yourself. I am your star. You are my star. We are all one. Until next time, this is Kaz, your Quantumyst at MyStar Wisdom, guiding you toward the celestial harmony that unites us all.
Numbers 11, 17. He asked the Lord, make sure to subscribe, share, and engage in the comments as we explore the truths that lie within of all these people on me. Kaz Quantumyst. 17. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them. They will share the burden of the people with you so that you will not have to carry it alone.